Welcome to Inside Missions, a production of Maranatha Volunteers International, offering an in-depth look at the people, the cultures, and the countries where Maranatha is working. I'm Dustin Comm, and I'm joined today by Laura Noble. Laura has worked in donor relations for Maranatha for many years, and today we're going to talk about her experience because you've had a unique career doing one thing at the start and doing a completely different thing in the beginning. But Laura, welcome to Inside Missions.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
So early in your career, you were not doing nonprofit work. What were you doing?
Well, I was selling software to large corporations and actually financially made a really good living.
I was going to say, so you are in sales, you are living a certain lifestyle. Like, how would you describe life at that point?
I was living in Newport Beach, and I had a nice home on the golf course. I had fancy friends dating a billionaire. And, really, I guess you could maybe living a life that a lot of people would dream of living in a way. But I know people talk about this and it sounds like such a cliche, but sometimes cliches are that because there's some truth in it. And the money, like hanging around with semi-famous people or people definitely with money, that isn't it. It just, like, you still go to bed at night and think, God, is that it? Is that it? And it's interesting to be close enough to be personal friends with people who have way more than they need, and they are not happy. Mm. They're picking on other people. There's just a sense of the same unhappiness that most people have. So that was a big, big lesson for me. And I'm so grateful that I got to see that firsthand. I needed to see that firsthand. I needed to feel it firsthand for myself.
Well, you were just telling me earlier that, going through college and it wasn't always easy through some of those periods.
Definitely not always easy. And I think the financial thing of getting through college was definitely made a strong impression on me to be able to take care of myself financially.
Did you ever think one day when you were doing all these sales and you hobnobbing with people that were rich and semi-famous?
Yeah.
Did you ever think you'd be traveling around the world and visiting some sites where people don't have much to live on? And
Never crossed my mind. In fact, so I'm dating a wealthy man, and I'm whining about this guy to my sister on the phone. And really only a person that you really love and that they love you can say something like this. And she said this to me. It was a very pivotal point in my life. Didn't realize that then. I know it now. She said to me, Laura, I am so sick and tired of listening to you whine about these guys in Newport Beach. Why don't you date a real guy like Don Noble?
Oh.
That was a huge, now this is my sister who, it was an unusual thing to say for her. It was really unusual for me to hear that. At that point in my life, all I can say is I wasn't a Don Noble kind of girl.
Well, first of all, who is Don Noble? Who is Don?
Don is now my husband. So I did date him and we got married. And, that's, spoiler alert, but.
And Don is now, since 1983, has been Maranatha Volunteers International's president. Back then, what was the connection? How did it, keep telling the story about your sister's urging to date Don Noble. I've not heard this before.
Yeah, so when I was 12, I met Don Noble. He came to our school, and he was really, honestly, like nobody I had ever met before. He was older than me, But he really loved God. He was hip. He had been an Air Force pilot, actually graduated top of his class out of 1,000 pilots. And he had found God in the Air Force. Highly unusual thing. I don't think that's the point of being in the Air Force, but God got that guy by the scruff of the neck, and that's an interesting story in and of itself. Through a series of events, he knew that he didn't want to be a teacher for his entire life, but he thought, I want to be a teacher and give back, because somehow I was born and raised in an Adventist. I went through Adventist schools, and I never met Jesus. What can I do? He got his teaching certificate, and he came to my school. His passion for God, his authenticity made a huge difference in my life. I had not seen anyone like that, and the impact was life-changing for me. I loved him not in a romantic way, but in a way that you do a teacher who makes such a huge, significant change in your life. That piece seems somewhat insignificant, but not for me. Why? Because by the time I had that conversation with my sister decades later, I had really given up hope in real love. And I knew from being younger, when you're more innocent and you believe in real love and you believe in God, I knew when she said Don Noble, I was like, yeah, there was a guy that really could love another person. You know, you don't really love another person without God being in your life. It's not possible. When the Bible says God is love, and when God really wants to tell us that, if he is the source of real love, you're not going to be loved without somebody that knows him and is holding his hand. At that point in my life, and I think really everybody at all points in our life, it's one of the primary things that we're looking for, is to be loved for who we are, just raw like that.
Yeah.
You know.
So she throws this out there, and then how, at this point, you're not connected, I assume.
I'm not connected to the church, frankly. I'm in the bars every night. I'm living maybe a semi-regular life. What a lot of people do in their 20s and 30s, you know? And I was just as unsatisfied as probably a lot of people are, you know? And I'm like, hey, I mean, at this point, I'm open to anything. But when she said that, it triggered something in me. I don't think you would ever guess by looking at my life that I had been praying for 2 years. Every day for God to do something significant with my life. Give me something that's meaningful. I'm so sick and tired of just making money, of just getting up in the morning and schlepping software. It has to be done. I'm not saying it's not a bad job. I'm so grateful.
But there was no purpose.
But it just seemed like, it's just like, what am I doing with my life? Ugh, is this it? Is this all I'm ever going to do? Ugh. You know, and it's kind of, man, I was just like, oh, Lord, I believe that you exist. I've never not believed that. I've gone away from you. I don't live a life that brings me close to you. But really, Lord, save me and make my life something, you know? And I believe that God answered my prayer, and so much of the meaning of my life has come from this organization, from doing something I never would have imagined myself doing, my mom and dad had been involved in Maranatha, and they had really good friends that got them to go on their first Maranatha trip, Garwin and Marilee McNeilis. And my mom had called me and she said, I think you'd have a lot of fun doing this. And I'm like, oh, Mom, come on. Can you get your nails done there? I'm not that kind of girl. I'm just like, I see what you're trying to do and get me into, back into the church and all of that. And it's like, oh, brother, I'm not, no, thanks, but no thanks, Mom. Love you, but, I'm not doing that. And, I look back on that and I say, oh, God has such a good sense of humor. And he's like, well,
Not only are you going to get back into it, but you're going to be very involved.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, the long and short of it is I knew who Don Noble was for sure. And I knew he was part of Maranatha and a significant part. And this is back in the day when you dialed 411. The young people won't know what that is, but you dial 411 on the phone and you ask them, hey, can you connect me with Maranatha volunteers in Sacramento? And they will do it for you. Who knew? So this is how I got a hold of Maranatha. And of course, Don was on a trip. And I left a message there for him to call me back. And that began a journey. And here I am now.
Was it hard? Well, let me ask you this. How did you first get involved? What was your first interaction with Maranatha? Was it on a mission trip or?
Well, my first interaction really with Maranatha was because I was invited, and I was invited by Don Noble. I wasn't sure why. We weren't dating at that time. Of course, in my mind, I was hoping that we would date, but we were emailing and talking on the phone, but it was nothing romantic. So my very first trip was to go down to Cuba and observe baptisms and stuff like that. I actually was kind of scared about going on the trip. One, because I hadn't been around church people for decades. And I had to kind of admit to myself, what's a day going to be like without having a drink? And boy, am I going to need one with all these church people, But I really wanted, God knows what it is that will trigger something in our heart for him. And he knew that I wanted an authentic relationship with another person in a romantic way. And that was a driving factor for me. And I thought, you know what? If I'm going to go a few days without a drink, this is just, I'm going to have to do it. You know what I mean? I'm going to find out who these church people are. And it was so cool. They were just regular, normal, funny, fun, great people. And I thank the Lord for every single person on that first trip. It was a breath of fresh air. And I thought, I was comparing them constantly to the people that I was hanging around with in Newport Beach. You just can't help yourself, And I thought, you know what? These people are people just like me. They're looking for something more in their life, and they're finding it in God. And that was a really big deal to me. I wish it wasn't one of those aha moments, but it was. And then I kept emailing Don after that trip, and we were talking on the phone. My first real Maranatha trip where you lay blocks was, we stayed at a boarding school in Panama, right on the border, and the school that we were working on was in Costa Rica. And I remember a dear couple Ruby Hannenberg and her husband, oh my goodness, like these people are not of my generation. And I think her husband fought in World War II. They took me in. They just took me in. And I felt really authentically cared about by so many people on that trip. I remember sharing stories, listening to some of the stories of people on that trip. There was a drug dealer that had slept for, I can't remember how many years, with guns under his mattress, under his pillow, and under his bed, all sorts of different things, like just scared for his life. And he found God. And it worked for him. He was very authentic. He wasn't kidding around. His life was on the line. I remember another person on that trip who told the story where they'd accidentally killed their own grown-up daughter in a farming accident while they watched because they couldn't turn the machine off fast enough. It was their fault. They needed God. Like that woman had a husband and a family. It was a terrible thing. These were people who were healing, and somehow laying a block on a school in a poor country was helping. And I thought, these are real people. There were people who had been Adventists all their lives, farmers in North Dakota, people from Southern California that lived in a more sophisticated world. They were all coming together and they were working together. Like they didn't know each other, but it was like some family. And I thought, strangely enough, there's no place I can get my nails done here, but I'm feeling like this could be my family, you know? Yeah. And I will have to say that every trip that I've gone on where it's been a work trip, I have always met people that are so authentic, so dependent on God, and He works for them. And at the end of the day, it's not about the block. It's not about the mortar. I love that about Maranatha, is that we're building people. And it's a weird way to do it, you know, honestly, but people need these buildings. I think about the school that I met Don Noble in, the school that I met Jesus Christ in. Somebody laid those block. My dad laid a lot of those block on his own time with his own money. Like, what a cycle, you know? And you realize, yeah, that school is just brick and mortar, and we hope that Jesus comes and it's all burned to the ground. But it made a difference. And I just feel so privileged to be here.
Going back to that first trip you went on in Cuba, could you sense something in your own heart shifting right away, or was it something that was a process over time?
I think everything is a process, and I see how God had led me over decades. Like, this is going to be a journey, Laura, and I can hardly watch it myself. But God led me to that moment. When I went on the Cuba trip, I knew without a question in my mind, God is in this thing. I think I know where this is going. I can hardly believe it myself. But so far, so good. To me, that also sounds funny, but to me, it's like, man, putting up with the church people was like the thing I was most concerned about. Like, are they going to be judgmental? Are they going to be boring?
Mm-hmm.
They just weren't. They were just real. And I knew, like, I watched all these people that were getting baptized in pools, like hundreds of people getting baptized in pools. I was like, I don't know where, like, all these people have a journey too. And I think I don't know what God has planned for me. It was very watery, like I'm not sure, God, what you're doing here, but I know you're doing something. I know you're doing something. So I came back from that trip knowing that, okay, I think God's up to something and I want something meaningful in my life. And I think we're on a path here.
Have you met other people like yourself that were maybe in the business world and never thought that they would ever get involved in missions, but now are and have found some sort of change in maybe the trajectory of their life?
Yeah, so much.
Why are those people important also? Just to the mission and to, being able to push Maranatha's work forward.
So many that I will tell you that, I wish that we could do everything without any money. That'd be great, wouldn't it? But the long and short of it is, it does cost something to build buildings. And surprisingly, typically our largest donors have been people who are not Seventh-day Adventists.
And I don't know if we've ever said this on the podcast over the last however many episodes we've done, but Maranatha is a supporting ministry of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. We don't take any funding. All the funds for all of our buildings are raised by donors.
Yeah.
And, don't receive any funding outside of that.
Right.
Yeah.
So these are individuals who say, I don't have to give anything, and I really believe in what you're doing, but I'm going to write you a check.
And I've heard a lot of stories of people who are connected to the Seventh-day Adventist Church because of Maranatha. And if it wasn't for that experience, they probably wouldn't have any connection.
Well, that's certainly my story. And God has used this organization to make me see things differently about Him and the church and everything else. Everything in my life has changed. And I see a lot of people just like myself going on these trips, coming into the church, making donations to this organization. Why? Because they see God in it, just like I did, just like I do. They see that God is leading them. They see that God is leading this organization. And honestly, 10,000 years from now, what better thing to spend your money on? Like when you're looking back. I mean, we all have to live, and I don't think God asks us to eat out of the garbage. It's not a requirement. But, and I think God, He loves us. He wants the best for us. But most of us in the United States have enough to give a little something, and it helps us. It helps our Christian journey, to depend on God and to see how He is going to use us. It's such a privilege. And I mean that in the biggest way. It's such a privilege to be used by God,
What do you think that you've brought to your subsequent career with Maranatha from your past work in sales, software, that you think has made you a better asset to Maranatha in the work that you do?
It's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, the sales career, it definitely has something to do with, what I do now. It makes me think, but, at the end of the day, it's not like a sale. This is something that God is doing in people's hearts. God brings the money to Maranatha. It is a very individual, I'd like to think, oh man, I hope we never pressure anybody to do anything, because that's not like God. God works with our hearts, and we do something with Him because we believe in that. We believe in the bigger picture that, like, for instance, what Maranatha is doing is making a difference in people's spiritual life, that it will make a difference in people coming to the kingdom, that it will make a difference 10,000 years from now. We're going to see people that wouldn't be there had it not been for how God is tapping us on the shoulder and saying, hey, would you be willing to do this? But also, I look back on my experience. I think, God brings people with very unique histories. I can relate to people in maybe a slightly different way than a person who'd never left the church and come back.
Right.
I can relate to that. Even like I took all the pre-architectural work in college, I think, and my dad was a great draftsman and he did all his own plans. He was a general contractor. I'm like, I've been looking at plans since I was 4 years old. I love that stuff. I love the smell of fresh cut wood. I love to hear a saw. I like to play with mortar. I've been playing with mortar ever since I was a kid. It's interesting how, like, I don't know, God does crazy things with your life. You think it's going to go one direction and it goes a completely different direction.
And yet still familiar in some ways.
And it's all familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's all familiar. Yeah. That's a really good point.
What was the biggest hurdle, or was there any part of the transition leaving your career to come work at Maranatha? Was that hard at all?
Yeah, it was hard. In like probably the hardest thing is like when I was in sales, you close a deal, you ring the bell, and you're kind of the big hero for the day. And at the end of the month, like, hey, I did this. I did this.
You put a number on it.
You put a number on it. You can measure it. Oh, that's so great. That sort of thing. I started with Maranatha. I was a volunteer. I volunteered for like 4 or 5 years. I wasn't an employee. I came in every day. I was a volunteer. There was no bell to ring. I wasn't a big hero.
Sure. Yeah.
Like I wasn't even sure where I fit, like where do I fit? Can I fit here? I want to be a part of this so badly. What can I do that would make sense? And that from kind of, sales has a lot of ego in it, and, really, there's not a great place for an ego at Maranatha, and I appreciate that. That said, it was hard for me. Like you want to be the hero, dun, 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 and that just doesn't really fit. So I would say, like, allowing God to take the sandpaper and rub off some of the corners, and believe me, I'm not done with that process. Oh, brother. But yeah, I think that was hard.
You've been doing donor relations now for many years.
Yeah.
What drew you to that work specifically?
I think it was just a natural evolution. I was privileged enough to be able to go and talk with donors, with Dawn and Kenneth, and also was writing letters to donors, just thanking them for what they were doing, and talking to them on the phone. Like, I'm always curious what drives another person to write a check, many times of significant consequence. What is driving that person to do that? I believe that somewhere in there it's God, but I'm always curious to know the story. And it was really kind of a natural evolution.
Mm. So if you could kind of narrow everything that you do for Maranatha down to one thing, what is your favorite aspect of the work that you do for Maranatha now?
My favorite aspect is probably what it always has been, and that is the people. To hear what God has done in individuals' lives. I just got back from the Dominican Republic, and on that trip, I heard a lot of stories of things that God has done in people's lives. Dustin, I have seen crazy things that I never thought I would see. I've seen, for instance, the power of good and evil in India, devil possession. I'll tell you what, when watching a person that is possessed by the devil, it's not an epileptic seizure, it's not this, that, and the other thing, and I'm looking at that and saying, that's what the devil, there is definitely a power of evil, and there's a power of goodness and love. And when you're watching the power of evil, he wants to kill us all. He wants to kill us all. That is his goal. And there's stuff like that. You watch these people who will be saved in the kingdom, and the devil has had complete control of their lives. There is a way out, and it's so, like, it really impressed on me. He's trying to do that to me. Only he knows I'll fall for something. I'm not going to fall for what they fell for. I'm going to fall for something different. You know? It's such a lesson. I love the stories of how people have come to God and then they want to give back. Why? Why do people do that? It's like the devil is putting a selfish lifestyle, me, in front of us, and it looks great. Let's be honest. You know, right? Not going to lie. It looks great. But it's not. And you just get halfway into it and you're like, wow, there is nothing here. This is so disappointing. It's one disappointment after another. Why do people give back? They give back because their life has actually changed. They didn't find the disappointment that was everywhere else in their life. They found something real. They found love, real love. I would like to think that most of our donors and the people who volunteer, why do they keep coming back? Why do they keep writing those checks? Because they believe in God, they believe in the power of love, and they want someone else to know it. And they believe that this organization, what a crazy organization, building buildings that are going to burn up, hopefully in a few years, you know? But they believe that this organization is doing something to move that message forward. God is love. We can be saved. We can have eternal life. We can get rid of the blackness, the grayness of our lives, and have this great family where all there is satisfaction. They're writing a check for that. That's what I believe.
If your sister hadn't have called you up, or you guys weren't talking on the phone, where would you be today?
Oh, man. Well, I might be selling software or married to a wealthy person. Probably questioning, you know, I would be unhappy. I can tell you that. I would be unhappy. I'm grateful. I'm really grateful. I'm grateful for where I'm at. I wouldn't want it any other way.
We do have a tissue box. Our producer, Leo, is coming over.
Thank you.
We both may need them. Thank you. What has brought you the most joy in your time with Maranatha?
Oh, wow. You know, once again, probably seeing people change. Oh my goodness, Don, my husband Don found a girl in a shed years ago, and I'm just reminded about this morning. Real unfortunate situation. Really coming out of the war in El Salvador. And her mother was a person that sold her body. And Jackie is just an amazing person. And, it's Jackie's been on her own journey. So to make a long story short, Jackie has had 2 children by 2 different gentlemen, and now is married to a wonderful guy who has the same Adventist Christian roots that Jackie had. And they're
Jackie
raising...
is that girl, just
Jackie
to be clear,
is,
and Dawn was helping to sponsor her over the years.
Yeah. And so last Friday night, she WhatsApped me and she was like, "Hey, happy Sabbath." And I'm looking at my phone and it's a picture of her and her husband, Diego. And I'm like, what? You've got to be kidding me, to see she's been on her own journey. And now they're taking their 3 kids to church. They're rearranging their lives and they're committing their lives to God. And, what's the most satisfying thing? I think the most satisfying thing is to see actual, real people changing because God has used the organization that I'm involved in, that you're involved in. God's using this, that is definitely, it's about people, bottom line. Opening a new school, oh my goodness. How satisfying is that? I know there's a ton of kids in that school. There's a ton of families in that school they don't even know what's going to happen to them. But that school is going to change their life. Why? Because I believe God wouldn't let us build that school. We pray about stuff like that all the time. Not just Don and I. Of course, we're praying. But there's a ton of other people praying out there. There's a ton of other people giving. I believe God is in this. He's not going to let those dollars and that effort go wasted. It's going to come back with people in the kingdom. I remember being in India, opening a new school in Garo Hills. We opened the gates in the morning. And there have been people, families, whole families, outside the gates all night long, sleeping on the dirt in the cold, waiting for the gate to open. Why? Because they wanted their child to have a place in that school. Oh my goodness, do we do that here in the States? No. But to have grown men grabbing your feet, begging you to get just one of their children in that school, man, that the school will be filled today, that there's going to be a waiting list, and that the Spirit of God is here. Like, this is going to change people's lives. I believe that. I wouldn't be doing this thing if I didn't believe it. I can go back and schlep software any day,
One of the things that you do now is you will travel to different countries. You'll do site visits on a place that Maranatha is working at or has worked at or will work at in the future.
Yeah.
What is your favorite part of those site visits?
Unfortunately, people say, do you guys ever say no? We say no most of the time. And that is the sad truth.
So the Adventist church has requested, hey, would you come look at this site? We need a school here, or we would like you to build a church here, and we have to go look at it and see if it's something we can do.
Yeah. And I don't know that people understand in reality, this isn't a funny number. This isn't something made up. We have requests for over 50,000 churches and schools all over the world. Well over 50,000. 50,000. Can you imagine? So the most of the time, you have to say no. I know you're asking on the positive side. That's the negative side. Mm-hmm. Granted, not all those locations are good locations. And God doesn't, there's a lot of them, God's like, no is the right answer there, right? But it sure is satisfying to be able to say, yes, this is not only a good piece of dirt, but it's in a place, you don't want something out on a goat trail 100 miles out from anything, I mean,
we have
brother.
built some one-day churches in some places like that too.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
We have a solution if it makes sense in some of those situations. I know for me personally, if I'm at a place, maybe I'm going to help kind of promote a place that we would like to raise funds for, that we want to build a school or church at. You get welcomed into people's homes. You get to experience things that you're never going to normally get to witness, right?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Like going into, how many people get to go in to a cow poop hut in India and sit down with them and talk about their life through a translator? How many people?
And that was a church, right? A church that was meeting in that type of shed. Yeah.
Or it's a home. I mean, I'm talking about going into somebody's home.
Yeah.
How many people get to ride down the Amazon or take a donkey up into the middle of the mountains in Costa Rica to see a new church site? Oh my goodness. I feel guilty for being able to have all sorts of great experiences. Have I been out there and been hungry and gone for a day without a meal? Yes. Have I slept in places where they say, well, what kind of hotel was it? Well, it was a 1,000-star hotel because you could see them all, have I slept in places where there's cockroaches coming up and down the walls, and one place even where a rat ran over the top of the bed while I was laying there. Oh, joy.
Fun.
But, honestly, what a great life. I can honestly say, if I died today, I'd be like, thank you, Jesus. This is way more than I've ever expected to do. So satisfying, so wonderful, all sorts of crazy experiences. I am definitely privileged beyond belief. And I feel like I really want to give back too.
How many countries have you visited? Any idea?
I don't know. I know Don's over 100.
If you could choose one country that it's been really memorable or has a special place in your heart, what country would that be and why?
I would say, people ask that question all the time. I would probably say India. And the reason is that some of the things that I've already mentioned, India was a real pivotal turning point in my life where I saw good and evil in a very physical way. Like, oh, wow. There is real good and real evil, and this whole thing that people talk about or that you read about in the Bible, that's real. It is not like, we're not fooling around. And it was a very pivotal point in my life.
Personally, you were able to see those things firsthand, and that made an impression.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Also, it's very interesting. There's a lot of villages in India. You walk through the village and just a random question of like, have you ever heard of Jesus? And they'll be like, I don't think, not in this village. Now you might want to try the next village down,
That's so foreign to us growing up in a Christian country, that you wouldn't even know the name of Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful, loving people. Oh my goodness, their culture is complex, complicated, beautiful. So it is just definitely an interesting country.
I answer the same way a lot of times. People ask me, not that I've been to that many countries, but the language is completely different. You know, not even the same characters. The food is amazing. All sorts of variety there. A lot of diversity within the country, with different geographical areas and tribes and
so many people.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like so many people.
Right.
Like, you're just like, wow. I grew up on a dirt road. Like, oh wow, so many people. But anyway,
Laura, thank you so much for taking some time today. I want to ask you one more question about the project that you just referred to in the Dominican Republic.
Yeah.
You were working at and then we'll wrap it up here. The Ciudad del Cielo Adventist School.
Yeah.
You were working on one of our large buildings there that we call Education and Evangelism Centers, which has multiple classrooms around a central auditorium. For you, what was that experience like recently, going and volunteering, and for all of the people? Were you leading that project? You weren't leading it, okay. But talk about what you experienced on that project, and I think they had a big church service too, and there was commitments of people that were going to send their kids there. Talk about that.
Yeah. So, I grew up, I went to Seventh Adventist School, and that is actually where I met Don Noble. And I felt like, wow, what a difference being able to go to that school made in my life. I mean, really a super significant difference in my life. It's so cool to be able to lay one block after another. You're just like, I laid that block. I'm part of this school. I laid that. I'm giving back, But then to go to the service on Sabbath, and all these people came, we just had tarps on the roof, and, everybody's sitting there. You're starting to get the feel for how many people are going to be a part of this specific spiritual community. And they asked them that day, how many families are planning on sending their kids to this school? Well, these are people that all know each other, So it's not like, oh, I'm going to put my hand up and I'm really not part of this community and no one will know, and I'll just go back home and do my own life. They know that there's at least 5 other families that know who they are, and people were looking around. There was a short,
a little hesitation.
Yeah. And then people started putting their hands up like, well, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to send my kids to this school, And I think that's a lot of how it is here in the States as well. We don't know how we're going to do it. We're facing the same thing. How do you do that? I mean, it's a big financial nut for a lot of people. How do you put them through Seventh Adventist School? How do you put them through private school? But a lot of people raised their hand, and I was looking around. I'm like, well, this is why we do this thing, I think, before we even put a shovel in the ground, we were there looking at the property one day. They were using it as a dump. Like, the community was using it as a dump. Nice big piece of property. You can just go and unload your trash on it. There were rats running around. It smelled terrible. And we're sitting there with a couple carloads of people standing on this dump. And here comes this car. And it stops at the property. A man gets out with his 2 grown daughters, 20-somethings. And he says, are you Seventh Adventist? Yes, we are. What are you doing here? Well, we're thinking about building a school here. He almost started crying. He's like, I wanted so badly to send my 2 girls to Seventh Adventist School. And one of them's, they're both with him right there in the car. They were all heading home. They're going to college now. And he, even though he didn't have kids to go to the school, he was begging us, entreating us, using all the best words he could grab.
Because there is no Seventh Adventist school in this particular area. There is many churches.
There's over 80 churches
unbelievable,
surrounding that area. And if you wanted to send your kid to a Seventh Adventist school, there's no option.
How did, because you just said you'd visited this site before, how did returning and working on the actual structure change your relationship to this site? Did that impact it at all?
Yeah, well, I've been there several times, but they're for short visits to get to like, okay, I'm part of a team and we're going to look at stuff and I'm trying to think, what can I report back to a donor or to donors about this particular property? So I'm there with maybe a different mindset. But then you go and you're carrying the block, you're lifting the block. And by the way, that's hard, lifting the block. And I'm like, okay, and I just, praise the Lord for all those people who can lift block all day long. It's a great thing. But it's really fun to be able to work with a team of people and to like just get down and dirty and, get stuff done, actually see physical progress being made while I'm there. Like, this thing is going to happen, man. This is going to happen. And you start seeing people from the community show up for, say, Sabbath, and the head of the church, Paulino, coming in almost every day and, bringing some little treat or something. I mean, he was just so wanting to be a part of it, and he's a good guy and, really trying to lead the church in the right direction. You start feeling like, hey, this is going to be a community. I'm starting to see this piece of land with the church over there and the primary school over here and the trees and the sidewalks, and this is going to be a community. And someday they're going to forget all about Maranatha, and they're going to have their school and their church, and they're going to be leading people to God with that facility. Mm-hmm. And that's why we do it.
That's what it's all about. I think that's a good place to end there.
Yeah.
I guess we should also point out that campus is not just the school, but there's also a church on there. It's going to be multiple school buildings. It's going to be just a beacon for that community.
Yeah, it really is. And with the church and the school and everything on it, I think it is such a fitting representation for a man who really spent his life in the mission field, giving back, and that is Daryl Hardy. Bless his heart. What a fitting way to give back at the end.
Our late Vice President of Construction, Daryl Hardy, we're dedicating this campus to him, and he worked on getting things set up to be able to work at this campus. So it's going to be a beautiful thing when that campus is dedicated.
Yeah. We talk about things like a life well lived or something like that, but seldom do we talk about it in a sense from a selfish point of view, and that is, it's the most satisfying life. It's the most satisfying life. You want to be happy? You want to be satisfied? Find something you believe in that you can give back to. It's like a magic key.
And great opportunities with Maranatha to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Laura, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.